Hello, Julie Usher, Recipes for a Sweet Life. In this video, we'll be taking my embossed necklaces up a level by turning them into tiaras. And I've got a couple of examples of them up here and also down here. I'm going to be trying to replicate this one in front of me. Just a couple of notes. I've got different styles, which should be flashing across the screen right now. One, which is a variation of the tiara shown in my book, Ultimate Cookies. And it's done with all iced cookies with some other embellishments on top. Today we're going to make them a little bit easier, but I think equally ornate, if not more so, by using largely embossed cookie pieces like we did on the necklaces on them. And this is an example of embossed cookie pieces. They're not iced. All that texture comes from imprinting the cookie dough. Same with the one down here. Okay, so what you'll need to get started. This is largely an assembly video, so all of these cookies should be baked and decorated in advance. I'm going to tell you a little bit how to do some of the more difficult or different, let's say, pieces. So first off, you'll need the tiara base. This is what I'm sticking all the little individual elements to. This is an example of contoured cookie dough. I've got a whole nother video that talks about how to contour cookie dough, and I'm going to show you my setup for doing that here. And you'll want to gild that to start. I simply gild it by spraying it with my luster spray. This is a PME brand, but there are also other great brands out there that allow you to do that. Just set up a little backdrop and some parchment paper, spray it and allow it to dry, and then you can pick it up with very little rubbing off on your hands. So you'll need that piece. You'll also need about 7 to 8 embossed cookie pieces that are pre-decorated with royal icing transfers. I show how to decorate with royal icing transfers on embossed cookies in my necklace video, so jump on over there and see that. I'm not going to actually stick all these little elements down onto the embossed cookies here. We're just going to be sticking them up onto the tiara. You'll get a lot more description about how to do that in that other video. And when I say embossed cookie dough, pieces were all formed by baking the dough in these silicone baking molds and then popping it out and then trimming along the outer edge. I've got a whole nother video on how to do that as well. Just a side note on this tiara, you might be wondering what this contraption is here on the tiara piece. I just wanted to show you, because this is somewhat novel, how I actually come up with this rounded piece. I start by cutting a template for what I wanted, and this template is cut out of acetate. I cut the piece flat on a cookie sheet, and I've got another video about how to do this, but in this particular template will be found in my video description. The link to it will be found there. Cut around the template, pick it up, and then in this case, which is a little different than what you'll see in my contouring video, I contoured it over. I just laid the raw dough over the side of an oval cake pan. I've got another little cookie cutter inside that pan to keep this from flopping over that way. Then I stick the whole thing in the oven, bake it. When it comes out of the oven, I give it a couple minutes of cooling time. The dough will still be somewhat pliable at that point when it's warm. So if I want to give the dough more of a contour, you'll notice this tiara piece has more bend to it. That's when I would just sort of gently press in the sides to give it a little bit more bend. Here I didn't, so I've got a wider piece. So that covers the pieces you'll need, the one tiara support, and then 7 to 8 other decorated pieces to stick on top. We are back to assemble the tiaras. I'm going to start by centering this little round piece down here, because this tall piece sits on top of it. So I'm using caramel colored royal icing, very thick as a glue, and just sticking that on there. I'm going to stick these glasses on. I've got this whole thing elevated because I'm working on the side. It's just much easier for me to see what I'm doing that way. And I turned that because I thought it was viewing better from this particular angle. I was seeing more of the top of the bead that way. Now I'm going to stick this one here. And because I'm working with a pretty thick glue, I shouldn't have to prop this much. Knock on wood. I'm not applying glue all the way up to the top because my support stops about halfway and I don't want glue peeking out the back. And I'm also working on a little bit of bubble wrap, so should something fall off mid-process, it's less likely to disrupt a decoration. Looking at it from the side to make sure that this isn't leaning back too much. It's leaning back a little bit, but I think that's kind of natural. A tiara might do that, so I'm not going to prop it up. I could stick a little more icing in the back if I wanted it smack dab straight up. Okay, so the next piece down I put were these smaller little embossed pieces. I'm going to start in the center and go side, 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 side to make sure it's pretty symmetrical rather than working one side all the way back. Now I could just put it down like that. There is a little bit of a gap here and here. And I think in this case, I'm I might want to fill, as I did there, I want to fill some of those gaps with some royal icing transfers, just so that it looks really bejeweled. And I have a whole video about how to do transfers coming up. These are simple rounds pieces that I'm inserting here, which are actually really pretty easy to make. So I'm putting a little drop of glue down and then just inching that transfer into place to close that gap there. And I'm going to put a little turquoise one right at the top. Just using this to kind of give me a visual gauge of where I need it, right in about there. And because they're transfers, they're fully dry. So if I don't have the bead right where I want it, I can always slide it a little bit and not mess it up to get it back into position. So I've got those two filler beads in there, spaced enough that they kind of fill the gaps between these larger pieces. Now, one thing I did on that crown there, and which I'll do here, is I glossed up these green gems with a little bit of corn syrup so they look more like shiny emeralds, and this corn syrup will dry shiny. But you want to get the corn syrup on now before I put that bigger piece down, because it'll be really hard to get in between the two with a paintbrush later without painting everything with corn syrup. Now I'm going to rotate this back a little bit towards me so I can see what I'm doing and put on this next piece. Just with the thick icing glue again. I've kind of pre-shined the green gems on these larger pre-made pieces, but they may need a little bit of touching up. Sometimes the corn syrup will actually kind of get a little dull on you as it sits out exposed to air. So you can go back over it with a paintbrush and gloss it up. Okay, so I've got it halfway down. I'm going to do the other side now here. In retrospect, I might have put another bead in between here and here just because there's a bare spot, but I might come in with these pieces and fill in later. So we'll see how it goes. I'm going to continue now just putting down the rest of the pieces off to the side. You could put green little spacers at the bottom along the way, and I did that on all the other crowns. You saw me do that earlier, and I would advise doing it because it fills in some of the gaps, but I'm just going to continue forward without them. Just looking at this front on to make sure my pieces are symmetrical. Do the same on this side. And I always return to it front on to make sure that that view looks good, assuming that somebody will be looking at it that way primarily. Okay, and I kind of regret not putting those green beads in the filler beads in there, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So you have the ability with this project, if you don't like what you've done, to do exactly what I did. As long as your glue is, you're not making major adjustments and your glue is matching your crown piece, you have the ability to move things around quite a lot. Now I will usually kind of get my bead in place and then push it over with my trussing needle because my fingers are too big to kind of get all the way in there. And if there's extra icing, clean that out with my trussing needle as well. Now we'll stick that back down. I didn't gloss that bead, but you saw me do that earlier. Yeah, I think that just fills it in a little bit better. I'll go ahead and do that on the other side as well. So now I'm adding some green transfers. I wanted to mimic kind of the green transfers I've got arcing over this turquoise piece and the centerpiece. So I added 4, just same gluing process along the top. And before I finish, I want to see if I need to fit a 5th. I'm going to be putting this guy off to the side, kind of sideways, rather than straight up, because I just think it creates from the front view, creates a more slender sort of profile along the side of the crown, similar to here. But it doesn't look like it can fit a 5th, so that's good. I'm just going to tuck another green bead down here. And I usually start by, again, getting since my hands are kind of clunky and it's hard to get in there, I find tweezers are hard to work with, so you could try using them. I usually just get the bead there and kind of slide it into the icing if I have to, and then knock off that extra icing that got pushed over with my trussing needle. Just make sure it's squarely on there. I'm going to give these a little more drying time before I gloss them, because you may have noticed earlier I was picking up, some of the beads were popping off because I tried glossing them as soon as I put them down. Whereas if I let the icing dry a little bit longer, it's easier to come in and gloss them without them popping off. And now this piece I'm just going to tuck kind of at an angle here onto the side, kind of filling out that gap. I'm going to take a look at it, the front view. It looks pretty cool. I'm going to finish off the other side the exact same way, and then we'll come back and gloss the dots and it'll be done. Okay, so I finished the exact same process on the other side. I actually could fit another little bead in there. So sometimes the result won't be exactly symmetrical, but it'll still look good. And I've given these a little more drying time, so I'm hopeful that I can come in and gloss them without them popping off the way they did before, more easily. Sometimes one will pop off. So I always make a few extra, because once you get corn syrup on the front, it's hard to stick it back down. I just want to make sure I'm getting in and around the beads too, so I'm just not painting the top. That way it looks glossed all the way around. Repeat on the other side. And then it's almost done. Remember how I mentioned before I didn't like those gaps in the front? And then I regretted not sticking a bead in there? Well, I came up with another solution. And I think I'm going to lay, as I did on this side, a larger turquoise transfer right over that gap. And again, just a similar gluing process, and that should do the trick. Voila, finished tiara. One thing to note, I didn't come up all the way to the edge here, and that's why I gilded the gingerbread. I like some of that edge showing, but it looks a lot better when it's gilded. It looks more gold than if I had left it the original gingerbread color. The other thing you could do if you're really fussy is come in with a star tip and pipe a little border down here to kind of add a little frill to that edge. But I kind of like the clean look because so much else is so ornate here. So 3D cookie tiara, either fully assemble it and put it on plates as favors, or let your guests assemble them and have some fun with it. If you haven't seen my 2D version of this, the necklaces, pop on over to that video. Till next time, live sweetly.